now. We're going to call this meeting to order. Please rise. Join me in the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The roll call, please.
Mr. Morrow?
Here.
Mr. Harrington?
Here.
Mr. Maryhill?
Here.
Mr. Gardner?
Here.
Mr. Depot?
Here.
Mr. Fearby has been excused. Mr. Monty?
Here.
Mr. McNally has been excused. Mr. Miga?
Here.
Mr. Skodzbaba?
Here.
Mr. Politi?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Marnell?
Here.
Mr. Whitson?
Yes.
Mr. Giordano?
Here.
Mr. Tyler?
Here.
Mr. Gorland?
Here.
And Mr. Preston?
Here.
Thank you.
And I see our guest of honor has arrived. So now we're going to move. We're going to have a presentation. Dee Skodzbaba on the governor's budget. She is the Deputy Secretary of State. Correct?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning. Okay.
Oh, great.
I usually don't need a mic, but pretty big. Loud voice. Pardon me?
She does because they record it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Good morning. It's great to be here and take you through this year's 2016, the governor's annual State of the State message and also the budget. As he combined both last year, he did that again this year. So we're going to be taking you through some of the key points, and at the end, opening it up to questions. I know you guys know the process, everybody here. First of all, he proposes his budget, that is the Assembly and Senate get together. Currently, we're in budget hearings, legislative budget hearings, and then hopefully there's conference committees and they move towards an on-time budget April 1st. So the governor has had an on-time budget every year that he's been in office, and hopefully that trend will continue. New York is a state where great ambition produces great achievements. New York is the global capital for finance, innovation, and tourism. Our founders built New York into the great state that it is today. New York's focus on the future created the highways and parks that we still rely on. Governor Nelson Rockefeller built the World Trade Center and much of our public university system. The greatest project wasn't upstate. It was the most visionary and transformed New York into the nation's economic powerhouse, and that was the Erie Canal. Unfortunately, the state lost its way for decades. For 50 years, state spending was out of control. The state was spending more money than the people were earning, and you can see this rate of spending growth in each administration. And at that time, the inflation rate was 4.1%. So you could see that state spending, the rate of state spending, outpaced the rate of inflation. In 2011, Governor Cuomo called for a 2% limit on spending. And we brought spending to the lowest level in modern political history. And you can see 1.4% is the average increase in state spending. As you know, there's also federal funds. There's different funds that flow through the state budget. There's federal and state-only funds. The governor has kept his rate of increase in spending year to year at an average of 1.4%. And it will keep going this year. And we'll keep it going this year. Proposed 2016-17 budget is $145 billion. You can see the state total agency spending is flat. Medicaid index 3.4%. Education is an increase of 4.9%. Because we are spending less, we can tax less, and we are. Everyone in New York State is experiencing lower income taxes than they did on the day that Governor Cuomo took office. lowest middle-class tax rate since 1953, lowest corporate income tax rate since 1968, and the lowest manufacturer's tax rate since 1917. The biggest tax and the most difficult thing for all of us to get our arms around is the property tax. New Yorkers pay more in property taxes than they do in income taxes. And this chart just illustrates the median income tax that's paid, $1,874, and the median property tax, $4,703. Upstate has some of the highest property taxes, and when you look at this chart, we're not talking about property taxes just in this state. These are in the nation in terms of property value. So you can see number 1, Wayne County, number 2, Monroe County. So these are, that's on a national scale. Just illustrates the difficulty that we have with that issue. After 20 years of talking, we aggressively fought the problem and passed a 2% property tax cap. Our property tax cap freeze and cut will save New Yorkers thousands of dollars. $2,800 is the average amount in savings by 2017. After removing barriers to economic growth, we will aggressively work with businesses and regional partnerships around the state. We started with a place that needed help the most, and that's upstate. We are focused on upstate like a laser beam. To date, we've invested $25 billion in upstate. Today, more than 4,100 Regional Economic Development Council projects are underway, creating thousands of jobs and $22 billion in private investment. The Buffalo Billion proves the success of thoughtful, planned, and long-term funding. So we duplicated its approach and awarded $1.5 billion for 3 upstate regions: Central New York, Finger Lakes, and Southern Tier. It's working. Unemployment is down in every region of the state. When we define what a region is, it's defined by the economic development regions. As all of you are aware, we're part of the North Country Regional Economic Development Council. In 2015, upstate had the most private sector jobs in history, close to 2.5 million jobs. We know the importance of private sector jobs. Where I come from in St. Lawrence, close to Jefferson, we're very dependent on the 10th Mountain Division, and the military base there plays a big role in the economic stability or variability of our area. So it's very important that many parts of the North Country diversify with strong private sector jobs. We have to keep it going by building on our momentum. We have a $7 billion plan for upstate in 2016. First, we must grow small businesses. 97% of businesses are small businesses, employing more than 2.8 million New Yorkers. In this year's State of the State, the governor proposed a $300 million tax cut for small businesses, reduced the corporate tax rate for small businesses from 6.5% to 4%, for sole proprietors and farmers, exempt 15% of income for taxable purposes, and for partnerships and S-corps also granted 15% exemption. Our proposed $300 million tax cut will save more than 1 million small businesses, $1.5 billion over 5 years. We are proposing $750 million for round 6 of the REDC awards to support local projects. The North Country has been fairly successful in the Regional Economic Development Council competitions. Many projects that had their origins and their start right here with ideas that you carried forward are now coming into reality through that council process. And you have to remember, there's also money outside of the Regional Economic Development Councils. Some money comes through the CFA, or the Consolidated Funding Application, but there's also pools of monies in agencies that still come through more traditional processes. And we are proposing $200 million to fund top projects for the 4 URI runners-up. So there's going to be the same pool, $750 million that we compete, but the North Country will also be receiving an additional funds as runner-up for the big $1.5 billion that was announced earlier. The governor is coming up with an additional $200 million to be split. Urban centers are where young people and jobs are moving. They're a catalyst for economic growth. We will catalyze and incentivize downtown revitalization through a statewide competition and launch a $100 million Downtown New York Revitalization Initiative. This was a result of several meetings that were held around the state where we listened to many local leaders in different municipalities, and they talked about, it's one thing, efficiencies and consolidation and dissolution, but what we could really use is some sort of help with our downtowns, especially in a little more urban areas, but also in rural New York. There's been development on the outskirts, but we've got a lot of older buildings downtown, and we need some help. This program was a response to that. 10 communities will win $10 million of priority CFA funding. That CFA funding can be used for housing, commercial, recreational space, just to help those communities that need a little revitalization with their downtowns. I know that downtowns sometimes have your older buildings. It's difficult. What do you do with the second and third floors? Sometimes there's blight. Downtown that has a difficult time. What do you do with buildings that perhaps need to be removed? There are a lot of issues. This program is in place to try to work and address some of those things. The state will bring in urban planning experts to help communities develop plans to revitalize their downtown. It doesn't replace the technical expertise that many communities have, but it can supplement it. And sometimes some communities or downtowns, they don't have access to the type of planning and development that they always need. So this is a new program. Modern infrastructure is key to sustained economic growth. We all know the importance of roads, bridges, communication, airports, mass transit. We've got a lot of miles up here that we have to cover, a lot of bridges, a lot of roads. We need water, we need sewer, we need that type of infrastructure here. In many places, in rural parts of the state, some of it's outdated. Communities are under consent order. We all know the importance of improving our infrastructure. We are proposing an unprecedented $22 billion roads and bridges plan. We are also proposing a $340 million throughway toll reduction plan, which will cut tolls in half for residents that live in an area that you basically commute on the throughway. Eliminate tolls for farms and freeze tolls for everyone else. We know there's untapped economic opportunity in upstate's airports, and we will propose a $200 million upstate airport design competition to envision the airports of tomorrow. 74 upstate public use airports are eligible to submit design plans, and there'll be a selection process for 5 winners, and each will receive approximately $40 million. In this budget, the governor is proposing an additional $100 million for water infrastructure, bringing the state investment to $300 million, and local governments to invest an additional $1.5 billion. Broadband, essential in the digital economy. If you remember last year, if you recall, in the governor's budget, he proposed an unprecedented investment, $500 million matched with $500 million in private sector funding. So he was putting forward $500 million public sector, $500 million private, with the goal of making sure that everyone had access to, every community had access to broadband. The state is making, I just went through that, I got ahead of myself. We are actively working, just to go back, this month they issued the RFP to get it done. $500 million state plus $500 million in private investment. That RFP went out just recently. We are actively working to address climate change, and now we have an environmental and business opportunity. Let's build New York into the capital for the clean energy economy. We are proposing to invest $15 million to to train more energy workers and also install clean energy technology across the state, 150,000 solar-powered homes, 300 wind turbines, and train 10,000 workers. We are also committing to go coal-free by 2020. We will help the few remaining coal plants transition, but the health of New Yorkers must be our first priority. We realize this new economy demands a world-class education system. We propose the highest level of education spending in state history. You can see the amount of money that's outlined there. And something that school districts have been calling for many years, gap elimination aid was something that was put in place in 2008 when the state was experiencing a severe recession. It took money away from the school districts. The governor is proposing eliminating the GEA, creating a $200 tax credit for teachers for the classroom supplies that many of them purchase for their classrooms, $100 million to transform failing schools into community schools, and New York City mayoral control extended for 3 years. For SUNY and CUNY, we are proposing $6.9 billion, extend NY SUNY 2020 and NY CUNY 2020. This governor has really recognized the important role that SUNY and CUNY play in the economic well-being of this state. Their role is multifaceted, from educating students to also using the resources that are on campus, whether it be the alumni, the professors, the technology, to segue into the economies of the regions in which they reside. The state's EPF fund is a key tool for keeping our communities cleaner and greener. Since 2011, we've increased funding by more than 30% to $177 million. This year, the governor proposed going even further and increasing the EPF to the highest level in history, $300 million. The EPF funds a lot of things in the state of New York. In many of your townships, perhaps some of you have worked with the local waterfront revitalization program. That's a program that's run through the Department of State that comes through EPF funding. There are other programs that help many communities around New York State that actually come from EPF funds. New York's agriculture production is booming, but as the industry grows, so do claims that the food produced is safe. We are creating a new clear way for consumers to know what they're eating, and it's like the New York State seal of approval. Food that is grown in New York, handled to state certification, and which is grown with environmentally sustainable practices will receive the seal, and participation is optional for farmers. New York's economy is growing, but we must also ensure that the bright sunlight of economic opportunity reaches those that are left long in the shadows. We're proposing to raise New York's minimum wage to $15 per hour. It will give 2.3 million workers a boost in pay, adding $15.7 billion to our economy. There are two different schedules for the rollout of that increase, 2018 for New York City and 2021 for the rest of the state. We are proposing a record investment in housing, $20 billion, $10 billion for 100,000 units of affordable housing, and $10 billion for 6,000 new supportive beds, 1,000 emergency shelter beds and other homeless services, and 20,000 new supportive housing beds. Despite our progress in upstate, pockets of poverty still exist. Rochester has pioneered an anti-poverty model that partners the public and private sector. We're proposing $25 million to expand that model to the 10 upstate cities with the highest poverty. The new normal of terrorism requires an expanded approach to our efforts to protect New Yorkers. So the governor is proposing investing $4 million for high-powered rifles and body armor for all uniformed troopers. Public trust is essential for government to function at the level we need. We all know what the headlines have said over the last several years with a lot that's gone on in Albany. The ethics agenda that the governor is proposing closes the LLC loophole, increases campaign disclosure, limits outside income for legislators, adopts a voluntary public campaign financing system, promote transparency through new reforms to the FOIL process, requires legislators convicted of corruption to forfeit pensions. It increases J-COPE's transparency and enforcement, convene a constitutional commission to study the prospect of a constitutional convention. The last constitutional convention that occurred in the state of New York was in 1967. And there are certain things that can only be changed at the time of a constitutional convention. New Yorkers in New York, voters in New York State will have a vote whether to convene a constitutional convention. This governor is proposing that we prepare for that prospect by putting a constitutional commission in place, because it's quite an involved process. Allow New Yorkers to vote early, and automatically registered voters at the DMV. Out of 185 countries, the United States is one of just 3 that does not guarantee paid maternity leave. Let's pass 12 weeks of paid family leave. Each employee pays $1 per pay period. And we are proposing the most comprehensive cancer detection program in the nation. 91 million total, help community providers reach women to be screened for breast cancer, hire additional healthcare workers, and educate men on prostate cancer. This is a transformative plan for upstate. Now it's up for all of us to make it happen. And let's get to work. And that's the proposal. I come in under budget, or under time. I'm perhaps not under budget.
You did well.
Thank you.
So do you want questions or comments from the board?
Sure.
Anyone on the board have any? Mr. Miga?
The $200 million proposal, do you have some specifics on how that would be applied for and the timeline?
I don't think it's even going to have, you're going to have to apply for it. I think it's just going to be available for additional projects outside of just this year's Regional Economic Development Council. Jeff Farrell, the governor's regional rep, is right back there. Do you have any of the details on that? The runner-up pool?
$50 million right now?
Yeah.
I don't have all the details yet, but I can follow up with everyone on that.
I think it's just, I think it's in addition to whatever funds that you win in this year's CFA, there'll be another $50 million for special projects that, additional, perhaps that do not get funded in this round. So it's just additional dollars. I don't know if it's going to have the same guidelines as the $1.5 billion or not. We'll have to find out on that. So.
Mr. Scazafava?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Was there anything in the budget?
Distant cousin of many Jetishry.
Yeah. Thank you. Glad you pointed.
No, it's
I had to make sure you pointed that out. Right.
Jimmy Giuliano, Italy.
Yeah.
1900.
That's correct. Prison closures. Anything in the budget in regards to prison closures?
Jeff, do you know that? You know? If there is, I don't think it's anything that's upstate, but I'm really not sure on that. Yeah, I don't want to tell you no, that there's not, because there could be, but I don't think there's anything that's impacting upstate.
I attended the State of the State. He did, his only comment was that he was the governor that has closed more prisons than any other governor. But
Right.
I know he spoke at a Baptist church, I believe, and did mention the possibility of closure of more prisons. So anyway, as you know, that has a significant impact not only on my community but the North Country in general, because it's a major employer. The other question that I would have, the broadband funding. Now, you mentioned the RFPs have gone out. We currently are in contract negotiations with Time Warner, and they have committed to do expansions into areas of our community that currently isn't served with any type of service whatsoever. So RFP, when you say we've just gone down...
Do you know if they've participated?
Yes, absolutely. Time Warner has...
No, I mean, have they participated, like, I have to assume that they're partnering with the state.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So...
How does that work?
Well, how much longer are we going to wait, I guess would be the question.
No, I don't have the time. I don't have the timeline on that.
Before they release that money.
Okay.
I heard you mention they've gone to RFP.
It has.
Which request for proposals from
From the private providers.
private providers.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and I better choose my words carefully on this, but the minimum wage to 50 sounds great, and I do support a decent living. People that work certainly should have the opportunity to make a living. But just running the numbers in our summer program, for instance, where we employ around 40 kids for the youth program, we have to have one counselor for every 12 students, every 12 children that attend that program. Now, if we have to pay those kids $15 an hour versus $9 an hour, what the minimum wage is right now, obviously, there's not going to be as many kids working. We are going to have to cut back on that program because it's a balancing act, because you try to stay within the tax cap. And we just went through union negotiations. I'm just trying to point out the impact it's going to have at the local level. When you're paying your heavy equipment operators $18 an hour or $19, and now you bring your laborers to $15, that dominoes effect is going to take place. Absolutely is going to become an issue. So, and again, you know, I respect the proposal, and I know, but I'm just saying it's going to have a lot of impacts down the road, all the way across the board.
And I've heard these concerns. I've done a few of these presentations, and we're taking the concerns right back. I think there's some recognition that upstate is a little different than downstate in the fact that the way they're proposing rolling it out, but we're definitely taking the comments and the concerns that people have on this proposal back.
It's going to be a difficult balancing act for municipalities to try and do that and also stay within the cap.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Marnell?
Yeah, the concern I have is with the broadband grants. When someone gets a grant to install broadband, I think they should be given a time limit, and if they don't produce in 2 or 3 years, then it can go to somebody else. We have that issue. We had a grant, contractor was awarded a grant 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and to date, we have nothing.
Okay. Are you working through that?
Well, but
Okay.
it's
Okay.
Okay, Mike. Mr. Gilliland?
The RFP that you just put out, there is a time limit on that. It has to be done in a certain amount of months with the new RFP that went out.
There is a time limit on the new RFP. Yes.
Mr. Gilliland?
I got 2 things, Mr. Scavo. The first one is, we're, you know, in the balancing act, the municipalities trying to, you know, keep within the tax caps and stuff like that. We're facing up here an imminent crisis where we're already losing people, you know, who are dying out there because we can't provide adequate ambulance services. And we have for numbers of reasons, lacks of volunteers, et cetera. I mean, everybody has kind of admitted that we're going to have to go to full-time paid EMS services, and particularly up, you know, in our area where we have a greatly increasing elderly population. It's going to have more and more of demand for those kind of services. Last few years, we've had the state come up the EMS office and stuff like that, and we've given them our concerns on it, and I feel it's going on to deaf ears right now. 3 towns of the 18 have had to raise their taxes this year in order to finance an evolution in the ambulance services, so that that we can afford to start to pay because we're aging out our volunteers, going at 400 and 500 runs a year with 3 guys who are, you know, all approaching 70. We're at a crisis right now. I know we've had at least one in one of the neighboring towns here who had coded out and died because of an inability to get an ambulance there on time, and it's going to happen more and more. I believe, you know, I mean, I appreciate the governor and taking a look at all these things, but in EMS services, particularly in the North Country, we're down to basically just keeping people alive, and the state needs to get a laser beam on that particular issue up here.
Okay. Jeff, is there any way, have we had people from emergency services up here to convene on that issue?
Recently, Supervisor President can speak to that. What was that, 2 weeks ago?
To be quite frank, years to get the state Department of Health to listen to our concerns. I tried to get a meeting together, started in February, and we had it in December. We've been down this discussion many times. I will say they listened very intently, but basically told us that the requirements probably weren't going to change, and we needed to tell them what we wanted to do. And that wasn't really what anyone that was at this meeting was hoping to accomplish. They listened. We gave our version of, possible ways to at least help as far as lowering the requirements for a basic EMT and coming up with a system. And they basically said that that's not going to change. And when they left here, they did say that they were eager to work with us, but we needed to tell them what direction we were going, and we have discussed going to a county, the feasibility of a county EMS system. To be very honest, I was somewhat hopeful that we'd get a better response, or because as I've traveled the state and gone to conferences, this is happening in rural New York everywhere, and it's exploding budgets. It's blowing the tax cap right out of the water. I mean, in staggering amounts. And everyone in this room, I guarantee within no more than 10 years is going to have full-time paid EMS, and it's exploding budgets. And to me at times, the disconnect that, and I'm very supportive of the governor, by the way, but the disconnect that they don't seem to understand what's happening in rural New York. All we do is talk, and we've gotten nowhere. And to have 3 people come up and sit with us and have a meeting, it was great. But at the end of the day, they said, well, you need to tell us what you're going to do. And we were kind of hoping for something a little bit different than that. That's my take on that.
Is going to full-time paid?
Right now, we can't staff ambulances anymore.
Okay.
We cannot do it. And it's not just EMS. I mean, Mr. Politi just kicked me in the shin like he likes to do on occasion, and bring up the fact that it's happening in the fire service also. That's coming down the road because they keep expanding the requirements, that people aren't volunteering anymore. They're devastating rural New York. And I just heard yesterday about what Roby just said to me in regards to their increasing yet again the basics for the volunteer firemen. And they are creating an absolute disaster for rural New York. And to back up to the ambulance, the problem is there are no volunteers anymore, so everyone is being forced to hire personnel, and it's gotten to the point that they can't even get drivers anymore. So we're looking at staffing ambulances around the clock. Everybody in this room is going to be there at some point. And I really thought that the state should take a serious look at what's happening, and I just still don't feel that is occurring, that they're like, well, this is what it is, and we need to have standards. I think when you dial 911, you need to get an ambulance, but to be going from a $200,000 budget to a $500,000 budget, which has happened in several communities in the North Country, that would open somebody's eyes, but as of yet, that has not happened.
Okay. I think that's something that I'm going to take back to the local government division at the Department of State, too, to highlight the difficulty. I have heard the concerns before, but the concerns are basically driven by the increased requirements on volunteers, correct? I've heard it with firefighters before.
That's one of the big ones, and as I'd always tried to point out to the Department of Health people that were with us here a few weeks ago, was by the state's own figures, 80% of the calls are a basic level call. They don't need that high level of care. At no time did we suggest that we shouldn't have those highly trained people for those true crises that happen. But for 80% of the calls, we don't need that high level of care. And the EMT class has jumped from 120 to 170 hours. And all we get told, well, it's a national standard, it's this, it's that. Well, we don't follow a lot of national standards. So why can't someone realize what is happening in rural New York and really sit down and say, let's come up with a solution that everybody can live with?
Okay.
And that's really where we were going with that. Mr. Gillum?
The only other thing too is not, I mean, the volunteers are very dedicated people, extremely dedicated, but you also have to take a look at the demographic. Okay, we're aging out up here, and the young people who are working, just look at the economics that you were talking about. They have to work 2-3 jobs between a couple, if there is a couple there, and when they are working, they're commuting. So the old paradigm where you're working at the local shop in your community and you can throw on your fire coat or your EMS hat and jump in the ambulance and go, that's not happening anymore. There's less and less and less than that. And there's less and less actually just the pool of people to be able to do that in all these very small communities.
Thank you.
It's not just a lack of volunteers, it's just the pool that we can draw from.
Thank you.
Is that it, Sean?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Scozzafano, just one other thing along some of those lines is the creation, every year when we sit down, we put the budget together, one of the things that has really bothered me for as long as I've been here is the number of exempt properties that we have countywide that pay nothing towards services that are directly benefiting them also, such as public safety, 911, the jail, public health. And I think that the county should allow, or the state should allow counties to create special districts, which would significantly reduce the tax burden on those properties that don't receive the exemptions that are paying for all those services. And I just think that's something that really needs to be done that would have a significant impact on counties overall on the property
I've
tax
studied
burden.
that issue too. I come from a county, I think
That's
our
right,
tax
yeah.
exempt rate is 70%. It's at least high 60s.
And the only thing I'm going to leave with is that Scozzafava, the way you pronounce it, Scozzafava, the meaning of the name means bean sheller,
I thought it was bean picker.
one who shells beans.
Yes, sir. Very noble.
There's I had to bite my tongue. Anyway, is that it, Tom?
That's it.
Mr. Politi?
Dee, I want to take Tom's issue one step further, and that is that although the tax cap,
I thought you were going to go with the name or something.
no, although the tax cap has had strong taxpayer support statewide, and makes a lot of sense in some ways, it also has had a tendency to stagnate the growth in small communities, small local governments. And I think that one of the issues that we face is that, and we have said this on a number of times to state representatives, and that is that special use districts should not be or should be exempted from tax cap calculations for communities. As a result, you can't improve water and sewer districts. You can't improve fire and ambulance service and so forth without it counting against you. There's a fallacy. Most people think the tax cap is 2%. It's not.
No, it's
0.73%, I believe. Or
It's lower than...
maybe it's even lower now. But all of these, these things, when you're talking about special use districts and communities, we cannot improve our communities with those calculations included in the tax cap. And that's silly. And why it has not been addressed over the last 3 years amazes me.
Okay.
Mr. Monty?
I would just like to echo what Mr. Scozzafava, Mr. Politi, Mr. Preston, Mr. Gillen said. Our hands become tied. Each and every year we try to get our budget prepared due to the mandates from the state, which now, a lot of them they're not funding now, so our hands are tied again, and we're being asked to keep the property tax down. Yet, when I look at the presentation, we talk about upstate. I didn't see a whole lot about the North Country. I saw a lot about everything north of Westchester County and west of Albany, but not a lot about the North Country. And we're a diverse population up here. Again, we're an elder population, and things are different here than they are in other regions of the state. And it seems like, while philosophically it's great ideas, but practically for us, it's kind of impossible to make happen.
I think there are a lot of things that are included for the North Country in this budget. I think when you look at roads and bridges, I think the governor has made his historic contributions for tourism through the I Love New York program. I think he's tried to make sure that there's infrastructure development and capacity that's increased in the North Country, whether it be hotels developing in certain communities, making it easier for people to work with some state agencies, not always, but sometimes you can work with teams through the Regional Economic Development Council to build that capacity. It takes time, but I hear your comment and I hear your concern, but I can tell you just very off the top of my head that I know that this governor is committed to this North Country and to this region. There's not a doubt in my mind. How it gets implemented, the time frame, how it works, is everything perfect? Are all the dollars coming here? No, but there's a lot of money. The whole broadband initiative really is in part because of how difficult it is up here, whether it be with cell phone service or broadband. This is a beautiful part of the state to live in. You could telecommute, you could have all sorts of economic opportunities, but if we don't have the basic infrastructure in place, it makes it very difficult. But he's also done it trying to stay in line with spending of the state. He also understands we don't want to go back to a $10 billion deficit in this state. We have to go forward. And the other thing I saw with this governor, when Alcoa was going to close in St. Lawrence County, there's no one that swung a bigger bat to try to keep a business here. 600 people employed. So this governor is committed to the North Country, committed to seeing things happen. It doesn't always happen as quickly as what we want them to, but I think there's been good gains made, and acknowledgement of what the strengths of the region are through the Regional Economic Development Councils. Having said that, I'm also going to take your consideration and what you had to add to the discussion, whether it be the tax cap, and take that back. I understand that, I was a mayor, a village trustee. I know it's not 2% anymore, but I also know that local municipalities also have the option of overriding the tax cap. That becomes difficult at times, but if you make a case that is of the importance of the reason that you're overriding it, it becomes a little more tenable. But I understand nobody likes to do that because you have a certain amount of pressure on you from the people that put you in office. But we're going to take that back. The local government division is very aware of the difficulty with the tax cap, especially with special districts. And when you do water or sewer improvements, it makes it very difficult for communities at times to go forward. So we'll take back those concerns.
Okay, I'm going to take the opportunity to expand on that a little bit. I will say that I think the governor has been very good to the Adirondacks. I will say that he's been very good to Essex County and very good to actually the town of Wilmington. But having said that, I really do have an issue with we all get painted with the same brush. And there's probably communities where things are out of control, but I was voted into office, I'm in my 9th year now, and I've been doing my job. I've cut taxes, I've eliminated positions, I've consolidated positions. I mean, we have been doing our job, and now they said we needed to prepare this efficiency plan, but if you've been doing your job all along, there isn't 1% more to cut. It's just not there. And I know, I've followed very diligently followed the tax cap. But we've got a dam project coming up in Wilmington, and there is no doubt in my mind, there is no way we can move forward with that. The repairs to this dam that's essential to Wilmington, is essential to the tourism, without it going over, blowing that cap out of the water. And then you've kind of heard too about this EMS thing, so there's some real crisis again in rural New York. Where does Lewis or Wilmington, we don't have anywhere else to cut. We don't have hardly anyone to begin with. So at times it's frustrating that we're painted with that same brush. And on another comment that I wanted to make that Tommy, I'm sure will chime in on, the grant process, I mean, we're very fortunate for the funding that we have gotten, but I have spoken to you about this before. The payment process is beyond belief painful. I know that I'm going through it right now, that we had a project, it was waterfront money. I mean, again, Wilmington's very fortunate to be awarded that money. But we had 3 different areas in town, they were all public places that we were focusing on. And I was contacted a couple weeks ago that the invoicing and everything that I submitted, I did all the grant work myself. I do the submissions myself. My clerk is overworked as it is because we've eliminated positions. I submitted all this stuff and I get a phone call. There was electrical work done at all 3 projects that I needed to break down what was used and which location. And I said, well, they go out and buy a spool of wire, and I'm supposed to know how many. And that is what they held firm on. And to this day, we're kind of stalemated because I just think that's a little bit too much. I understand documentation, and there shouldn't be just they hand you a check. But you cannot get the money still out of them. And Tommy, how long have you been waiting?
Over a year.
Did you get any movement?
We finally, but I mean,
Let me tell you what you got.
very,
Let me tell you what you ended up in the cross. Go ahead.
we had to roll a bond anticipation note
Yep.
over because I mean, I'd rather have my knee replaced than go through this again with Department of State. It's just, it's painful.
I'll tell you
to
what
say the
happened.
very least.
If you've been caught in the last 3 or 4 years with the Department of State, what we found is different grant programs. There was a review of all processes and procedures in the agency, and that also deals with contracting. And what they found is that different contracts were being administered differently. And checks were going out when work had not been done versus being reimbursed on a reimbursement basis. So what had to happen was there had to be standardized contract procedures that were put in place. And it sounds like if you were doing something in the last 2 or 3 years, you probably got caught in that, which slowed it down. Now, having said that, maybe there were problems before that. But I know just recently, they've had to review the way, especially local waterfront, how we were reimbursing. Used to be the documentation didn't have to be as specific. Now they're looking for more specific documentation. I think once that it gets worked through, and municipalities have an understanding of what they need to provide and a reasonable timetable, I do think it'll be better. But for those of you that were in the middle of this while it's changing, I know it's been horrible. And I've spoken to people at the Department of State, and I can go back. I know I spoke on your behalf, and I can go back and speak on your behalf, too.
Well, again, that's very much a concern of mine, and I understand documentation, but it went from, as you just described,
I know.
carte blanche,
I know.
that it blew me away. You didn't have to submit anything, to now they're so in detailed, it's like there's got to be a happy medium here
There
somewhere.
will be.
There
will
just
be.
has to be.
And there will also be realistic expectations up front, so that you have an idea of how long it will be before you get your money, so you can plan, because I know what it's like to have to, all of a sudden, there's a big hole in your budget because you've spent this money on a project with a promise that it's going to be reimbursed, and the money's not coming, so you're rolling it every year. I know that. But I think that what you'll see once this is complete is you'll see a realistic expectation of what you need to provide and the timeline for you to be reimbursed. And that's the goal. But that's what happened. It went from kind of not a lot of checks and balances to a point that, wait a minute, we need to standardize what we're doing here. And I think you'll see something that's reasonable in the middle. And if you need help working through something that you think is unreasonable, I'll try to do that.
I'm certainly right in that process right now.
Okay.
Mr. Harrington, did you have something?
Yes, Penfield Pond is located in Crown Point. It is near and dear to all the residents. It was heartily tested during Hurricane Irene, and it held firm. But engineers from the state demanded that the pond be lowered. It was lowered, and that satisfied the state. Now the state has come in again and says, now the dam must be removed. We feel, the persons involved with this, that being Penfield Museum and local residents and contractors, feel that the dam is secure and that the state really needs to take a second look at this. I know that many dams throughout the state are deemed unsafe, but I do not feel that Penfield Dam is in that category.
Yeah, I can certainly have a conversation with you about that after this.
Thank you.
Okay, there was other people on this
Did you get that? Did you hear? Okay.
Mr. Marnell? Go ahead.
One other issue with contracts is, if you have a project that they'd like to have you use 30%, I think it requires 30% women-owned minority business. If you have no contractor that within 100 miles, 120 miles, that is a women-owned majority, you should get an exemption. We just had finally got somebody from Rome, New York, and this cost the contractor more money. I mean, makes it very difficult because we don't have many women-owned minority businesses.
Did you finally get the waiver? Did you get a waiver?
I did get a contractor from Rome, New York, but that's 120 miles from Spoon Lake.
Okay.
So just transportation, bringing his equipment out, but we did. The other thing is, I'm glad to see road work, because last month, the regional director over here at DOT was here talking about salt use and cutting back on the use of salt. And their hands are tied. If the roads are rough, the snowplows, no matter what kind of snowplow you buy, they won't scrape. They hit the high spots. So they have to do their job. They have to use more salt. So if the roads are smooth, they get scraped down, and we use less salt and less damage to the environment. So whatever the roads, you keep them smooth, they can be cleaned quicker, and it takes less salt to get them bare.
Well, one of the most persuasive actions that I think I've seen was, wasn't there a video from Newcomb?
Yes.
Driving on the road?
Correct. Okay, anyone
It
else?
did work, and I remember it very well.
Mr. Mario?
Good morning, Dave. We appreciate you and Jeff taking the time to be with us here this morning.
Thanks.
I guess my comments would be centered more for the county structure that we have. Again, we weren't able to meet the tax cap for a variety of reasons here at the county. One of the larger costs that we incur, and I know there's been a lot of discussion, is on indigent defense. We're always trying to do the right thing here at the county, but the costs are phenomenal. We're looking at closing in on $1 million now. The state needs to pick that up. We've heard a lot of different representations, about the court case and then the possibilities of the consideration from the state, understanding that's a huge amount of money for the state to incur too. But that would be near and dear to our heart here.
Okay.
That is the only thing that's going to allow us to try to get into place. Then some of the fundings for like public health, CHA, things like that, those are services we have to provide. But it's a lot easier if we were able to just pass those costs on like the state does.
Okay.
Then it makes it a lot easier, but we appreciate everything you can do.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else on that side? Anyone over here? If not, thank you, Dee Dee. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
wait till after this. I'm going to leave it. Come down.
What news channel was that?
Pardon me?
What news channel? Or that reporter?
Not a clue. Lady with a pencil? No idea out there. Maybe it's just before. No, I don't. Can't remember.
Oh, she was good.
Funny story. I've seen her. She got caught in traffic on the highway. She was like 10 cars back, blowing her horn. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, now we're going to move to resolutions. Go ahead, you.
There were no resolutions from the Human Services Committee and no resolutions from the Public Safety Committee. Resolutions recommended by the Economic Development Committee, approving the recommendation of the Southern Essex County Lake Champlain Microenterprise Grant Review Committee to award funds in the amount of $35,000 to Starway Services LLC in the town of Mariah.
Moved by Mr. Scozzafava, seconded by Mr. Paliti. Any comments or discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the Community Resources Department to apply for a Smart Growth Grant for the fish hatchery in an amount up to $75,000 and authorizing up to 10% and matching funds to come from the fish hatchery capital project account.
Moved by Mr. Harrington, seconded by Mr. Marnell. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the county purchasing agent to go out to RFP and award a food service design consultant for the nutrition building.
Moved by Mr. Marnell, seconded by Mr. Paliti. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
In support of Governor Cuomo increasing the Environmental Protection Fund to $300 million.
Moved by Mr. Merrhew, seconded by Mr. Gilliland. Discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Resolutions recommended by the DPW Committee authorizing the Essex County Department of Public Works to enter into a shared services agreement with the New York State Department of Transportation for emergency assistance and further authorizing the county chairman or county manager to execute said agreement.
Moved by Mr. Gardner, seconded by Mr. Miga. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the issuance of a permit to Ironman Lake Placid for the use of the county roadways for the 2016 Ironman Triathlon race to take place on July 24th, 2016.
Moved by Mr. Paliti, seconded by Mr. Marnell. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing payment in the amount of $7,294.44 to Development Authority for the repair and raising of an overhead fiber optic cable located at the county highway garage.
Moved by Mr. Morrow, seconded by Mr. Moore. Discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the purchasing agent to contract with Schroeder Rivers Association in an amount up to $24,900 for engineering services as it relates to the replacement of an existing culvert with a new bridge system at the crossing of the Hazeltown Road over the New Bridge Brook in the town of Wilmington.
Moved by Mr. Paliti, seconded by Mr. Tyler. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the county chairman or county manager to execute a contract amendment with Schroeder River Associates in an amount up to $31,300 for engineering services as it relates to the replacement of an existing bridge with a new bridge system at the crossing of Route 34, County Route 34, Trout Bridge Road over Trout Brook in the town of Minerva.
Moved by Mr. Monti, seconded by Mr. Miga. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the county chairman or county manager to execute a contract amendment with Schroeder River Associates in an amount up to $31,300 for engineering services as it relates to the replacement of an existing bridge with a new bridge system at the crossing of County Route 34, Trout Brook Road over Minerva Brook in the town of Minerva.
Moved by Mr. Monti, seconded by Mr. Moore. Any discussion?
Just for your the information, especially for the new supervisors, you're seeing a lot of these this year in terms of the engineering services. What we did in the budget last year was we allocated $75,000 or so for doing engineering work ahead of some of these bridges, because what we found was by waiting on the engineering, we were coming up with estimates that were off of what we actually needed. So the purpose of these resolutions is to get that engineering work done ahead, so that when we do go out for a bridge bond or something like that, we have a more accurate figure.
Mr. Marnell?
Yeah, the public may look like we just like to build bridges, but these bridges have all been red by New York State, and it's required that we replace them.
Yeah, during the governor's presentation, they talked about funding for bridges, but it's really a drop in the bucket for what's needed. When we have 178 bridges, I mean, every 5 years, we're borrowing upwards of $7 million to deal with bridge replacements. It's one of the major issues we face as a county, and there's really very little or no help from either the state or federal level. It's almost all local share.
Mr. Skozafob?
Is Resolution 5 and 6, that the same bridge? Or different bridges?
They're over two different brooks. Trout Brook and...
So it's 31-3 twice.
Stand by.
62-4?
Mr. Dugan, you want to come forward, please?
It's not the
Explain.
same bridge, though, I don't think.
Morning.
It's two different locations on the same County Route 34.
Okay.
One crosses Trout Brook itself, the other crosses Meredith Brook. Both bridges have been red flagged, as Mr. Marnell has said. Our thought process is to design and bid both bridges at the same time, hopefully trying to get a better number, better bids for construction. They are two different locations on
Thank you.
And just as a perspective, when I was supervisor, one of these bridges was scheduled for replacement back then, and it never got done.
No, I'm not questioning the need, just when you read the two resolutions, it gets a little confusing.
Okay. Any further questions on the resolution? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Thank you, Jim.
Authorizing the county chairman or county manager to execute a contract amendment with Schroeder River Associates in an amount up to $33,000 for engineering services as it relates to the replacement of an existing bridge with a new bridge system at the crossing of Fraternal Land Road over Paradox Creek in the town of Scroon.
Moved by Mr. Marnell, seconded by Mr. Moore. Discussion? If not, Mr. Marnell?
Just a comment on that. Presently, there's two multi-plate arches in there that I put in with the county 79, and they rusted away. So by putting a bridge in, get 75 years out of it instead of 30, or 100 maybe.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Requesting the state of New York to restore funding parity between the capital plans of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the New York State Department of Transportation. Parity.
Moved by Mr. Morrow, seconded by Mr. Gilliland. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the purchasing agent to go out to RFP for services on the removal of hazardous materials at the fish hatchery.
Moved by Mr. Harrington, seconded by Mr. Moore. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the purchasing agent to go out to bid for a utility terrain vehicle for the Soil and Water Conservation Department.
Moved by Mr. Marnell, seconded by Mr. Morrow. Discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Resolutions recommended by the Personnel Committee authorizing an amendment to Resolution Number 376 of December 28, 2015, contracts for insurance coverage in 2016 to include the New York State Department of Motor Vehicle fees in the amount of $1,610.
Moved by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Whitson. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Resolutions recommended by the Finance Tax Reduction Mandate Relief Committee, authorizing the institution of a new policy of issuing all employee expense checks by direct deposit.
Moved by Mr. Miga, seconded by Mr. Moore. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing the payment of $5,500 to fiscal advisors and marketing for work done in connection with financing a $4,345,000 bond anticipation note sale for renewal for 1 year from 12/17/15 to 12/16/16 at a rate of 0.97%, and authorizing payment to Premier Printing of $1,608.88 for printing notices of sale and official statements for the same note to come from budgeted funds.
Moved by Mr. Scozzafava, seconded by Mr. Merryle. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Authorizing a budget amendment in the Information Systems Department in the amount of $128,000 from 2015 unappropriated fund balance into the Capital Projects Fund 13-2 for future purchases of IT equipment.
Moved by Mr. Scozzafava, seconded by Mr. Gardner. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
Under miscellaneous, authorizing a budget amendment in the Mental Health Department, increasing revenues and appropriations in the amount of $230,359 to accept Vital Access providing funding, 50% state and 50% federal, which will be used to increase and sustain access to critical services at the outpatient mental health clinic.
Moved by Mr. Harrington, seconded by Mr. Monty. Is there any discussion? Not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried.
The other one from the floor, I sent the board an email regarding this resolution for your consideration. It's authorizing the purchasing agent to bid an award for the purchase of a paper cutter in the Central Printing Department in an amount not to exceed $13,000, with funds to come from contingency.
Moved by Mr. Scozzafava, seconded by Mr. Moore. Discussion. Did you have anything, Dan?
Well, the only thing I would say on this is that we had no idea when we were putting the budget together that this was going to be a problem. It's a 30-year-old machine. We did get in contact with a company from Vermont. Their charges for coming over here and looking at it, and they essentially said they weren't sure they could even fix it if they looked at it. It's that old. Truthfully, it's something that's used every day in there, and it just chose to break down this year, and we had not really anticipated that. The other problem with this particular department is that there is no additional money. Some departments you find money somewhere within the budget to cover some of these things until later in the year. This department has no extra money. What is there, and we need to take it from contingent in order to cover the cost.
Any further questions or comments? I will say, and then for the benefit of the new supervisors, normally we don't dip into the contingency this early in the year, but in this instance, I don't think there was any really other choice, and I will also share with you, you should stop at the printing office and find out what they can do. They do some really amazing things. They do newsletters for us, they do rack cards, and it's normally less expensive to go there and get real quality work than it is outside printers, so that's, just a little something to share with you. You should stop and see what they can do. They can really do a lot of things. Posters, really, you name it, they can do it. They are envelopes, and it's letterhead, you name it, they can do it, and it's normally at a much reduced rate. So, any further discussion on Mr. Politi?
Dan, what will balance be in the contingency fund?
I honestly forget what the total was we put in this year, but it's the first amount out. I don't have that number in front of me, but it will be within the resolution when it comes for regular board. Dan always includes a total for the contingent account as it gets passed.
Any, Mr. Monty?
Yeah, are there any other areas where, like, we don't have funding like this, like you said, that they're right down at bare bones, that we should be looking at down the road for equipment?
Well, we honestly, Jim, we do try to anticipate that. When we sit down at the budget workshop, should we say to them, do you have anything that you anticipate that you will need during the course of the next year? And if we do, we try to budget it. 50% Typically, though, if it turns out to be something that's a larger cost, we look at doing a BAN and kind of spreading that cost out over 5 years. But in this case, we just, it's just something that always worked, and we just never really paid attention to it.
Thank you.
Mr. Marnell?
And do we have to have a motion to get an RFP for GPSs for vehicles?
I think that's something we could look at. I don't know if we talked about it in DPW yet or not, but...
Just briefly here a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Maybe we should do that.
Maybe revisit it back.
Yeah.
DPW committee?
I think if we were going to do something like that, that's, we still have to, Jim and Chris are putting together a list of equipment. If we were going to do an upgrade like that, it would probably go in that BAN as an upgrade to equipment within that.
As we discussed, the nurses that are they're not only highway equipment.
Right.
But
Yeah, there's certainly a lot.
Not every unit needs it.
Right, but there are a lot of our vehicles that we currently use that probably would benefit from having the GPS installed.
Well, the reason I'm anxious to do it, because I want to buy some too, and I'd like to be able to...
I see, you're looking for a piggyback, aren't you?
I'm sure we'll get a better buy.
Let's get back to our paper cutter. Any further discussion on the paper cutter? If Mr. Manning suggests that we change the wording there from bid to procure, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried.
There's one more resolution I have from under miscellaneous from the OFA department. You have copies on your desks. It's authorizing a budget amendment to increase revenues and appropriations in the amount of $20,000 for a BIP grant. It's a balancing incentive program.
Moved by Mr. Harrington, seconded by Mr. Gilliland. Comments or questions? If not, all in favor? Opposed? So carried. Did you have one more from mental health?
We did that one.
That one was included on the listing. Yep, that was just the information on it.
We
Yep.
have one more from,
We got Mr. Manning.
Charlie, we have this one, did we do the one on the cuisine trails? Do you want to?
I didn't think that was coming up.
Yeah, I think we talked about doing that during committee.
All right, we can do that.
Better idea with that one. Mr. Moore.
Anyone else have anything? Mr. Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked about this off and on for a long time. Hasn't come up recently, but the building is not getting any better. And that's some of the buildings on the Frontier Town property that the county owns. At the very minimum, the restaurant's roof is caving in, becoming an increased safety hazard to the public, and I believe is a liability to the county. So at the very least, I'm requesting that we get a determination on the cost to demolish that building and have that debris removed. I'm not asking that we do the actual removal, but I'd like to take the first step at least and find out an estimate on what that would cost.
Mike and I and Ron had this discussion, and I think we can get an accurate estimate. We do have some firms that provided those services in the past, in particular the tear downs that we did under the FEMA project. We have determined that for the purposes of hazard waste removal, we have to consider the whole property as requiring hazardous waste removal because it's unsafe to go into the property in order to determine the exact amount. So whenever you have a building that's unsafe to enter, you have to assume that the whole building requires hazardous waste removal. So we can, I talked to Mike, and I don't think we necessarily need a resolution right now. We can get an accurate estimate, I think, based upon the information that we currently have, and then once we have that, we'll bring that back to you, and you can make a decision whether you want to proceed.
Mr. Moore? While we're doing that, I would request there's other buildings on that same road, the old warehouse and storehouse. While we're doing it, if we could get estimates on those at the same time, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Moore, just for clarification for the other board members, is this the property that we put to the auction and then...
It is. If you were to go down Route 9, get off at exit 29, head south towards Scroon Lake, you're about a mile down the road. There's a road called Frontier Town Road. That is the old entrance. You'll see a big parking lot there, and you'll see the restaurant right there. If you were to follow that Frontier Town Road down, you'll see the other two buildings that I'm talking about. There's also a motel whose condition that we have not condemned that building yet, but we did condemn the restaurant probably in 2013 or 12, I can't remember which, and that other group of buildings where the storehouse was. So, but that is part of that property that we were in litigation with, and it's now back in our hands.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Skozafob?
I'm familiar with the buildings he's referring to, and I'm in total agreement. They're a huge liability. The county owns them, and we are responsible for them, and they need to come down before something bad happens over there, because it's right on 9N and 22. So, I mean, if they were in my community, I'd be saying a lot more than what Mr. Moore is saying, believe me, because they're a huge liability.
Mr. Manning said he'd deed those buildings to you, Ron, right now if you want.
Yeah, that's what I want. What was that?
We deed those buildings over to you. Mr. Marnell, you have a...
Could we do this as steps? You could with buildings, you can't go in it, but could they be demolished? So it's nobody get hurt in them. Material left on site, and then another, because it would be very expensive to, because there is hazard.
Well, again, I think we got to sit down and
Right now, I mean,
come up with a plan forward and what we're going to do with this property to begin with. So,
but those
and that should happen sooner rather than later, in my opinion. Anything else on that subject? Anything else to come before Ways and Means? Mr. Gardner?
Yes, I'd like to get a couple of resolutions for condolences. The first one is for Edward Hoskins. He worked for the county.
Can I get a motion, unanimous second, please?
I got a second.
Thank you.
And the second one is for Wade Palmer. He was the highway superintendent in the town of Essex a few years ago.
Motion, second, please. Thank you. Anything else to come before this committee? If not, we stand adjourned.